Hi all, in this video we will look at OpenID Connect authentication. In the last video we have already seen an example for custom authentication for SSO, which is SAML SSO authentication. Now it is OpenID Connect SSO authentication. Much before we bring in the aspect of SSO, let's look at OpenID Connect, how this authentication happens, right? By picking a simple example. Assume that there is a user who is trying to access a Pega application. If this Pega application is leveraging OIDC as an authentication for SSO, then ultimately what would happen is, through some means, right, how that should be configured or how that is implemented, all that we will see in a while. But at a very high level, just maybe we are talking at a very high level. Okay, when user is trying to access a Pega application, then Pega application would redirect the user to OIDC provider, and then OIDC provider will prompt a challenge stream for the user. Okay, now when I say challenge stream, I mean to say a login screen where user has to enter a username and password and stuff like that, right? Now, of course, why are we talking about OIDC provider? What is OIDC provider, right? It is nothing but an identity provider. Like how we have seen in SAML SSO, how we have an identity provider. Same way here in OIDC, all the identity providers which are involved in OIDC, we call them as OIDC providers. Okay, in depth about OIDC, of course, OIDC leverages OAuth 2 as a protocol. Okay, the underlying protocol for OIDC is OAuth 2, but of course we are not covering the entire OAuth 2 in this particular session, but we'll cover that in a later part. But we will see how this OIDC authentication works by just picking only two parties in the picture, that is Pega application, which is acting as a service provider, and OIDC provider, which is nothing but which is acting as an identity provider. Alright, so just now we have spoken about very basic steps, that is when user is trying to access Pega application. If Pega application is already configured in such a way that it is having OIDC authentication, then what would ultimately happen is Pega would redirect the user to OIDC provider, and OIDC provider would prompt the user for the user with the login screen, right? And then user has to enter username, let's say password, and then once user submits it, the validation of this particular user will be done again in OIDC. And finally, once the validation is successful, let's take a happy path. If it is successful, then finally what will happen? User would be granted with a token. All this fundamental would remain the same, right? User is granted with a particular token. Let me call this as token, because same thing, right? In the last session we have seen SAML SSO. Even in that authentication, finally a token is issued to user. Till the time the token is valid and it stays with the user throughout the request that he's making through the HTTP request, right? So all of that will be valid and user will not be prompted with the login screen again. Now we are just tying the string back to SSO. Alright, so that means OIDC is similar to SAML, what we have seen before. Alright, user, when he is trying to access the application, ultimately he would be provided, user has to enter the right credentials, and then it will be validated against the identity provider, and once identity provider validates, then it issues a token back to the user. And that token in SAML, it is in which language? That is security assertion markup language, which is an XML format. And in this case, probably for this demo, we were looking at JWT. And in OIDC concept, we are looking at JWT, which is called JSON Web Token. And in this, J stands for JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Anyways, we are going to look at it in detail. That's fine. Even if you're not aware of what is JWT, we can take a look at this in this particular session. And probably we'll go in a very basic way. The overall theme is, let's try to conceptualize this so that the configuration and implementation and demo will be very easy for you. You can configure this by yourself, but if you understand this concept, tomorrow in your project, if there is any issue while you are configuring this, it will be very easy for you to resolve that. Okay, hope that is clear. Now this is like a very high level whiteboarding what we have done. So let's go and look at the actual sequential diagram, how this works, how many parties are involved. Here we already got to know two parties. One is our Pega, which acts as a service provider, and another one is OIDC provider, which is acting as an identity provider. Okay, mostly in OIDC context, we always call that as OIDC provider. Yeah, just before we jump in, right, to I should tell you one thing. Normally this open authentication, right, open ID authentication, why we call in this way? Suppose I developed a Pega application, but I want to rely on an identity provider for the identity. Right now, that identity, let's say in my case, I have created one Pega application called onboarding application. I want to allow all the users of Google or Facebook or Twitter, yeah, let's say I'm handpicking 100 operators, or else let's say everyone, any user who is having a valid Gmail ID should be able to access my Pega application. That means we are leaving the authentication open to Google, right? In this case, in this example, Google is the OIDC provider. How Google stores the credentials, how this open ID authentication happens, all of that will come into OAuth 2. Not just Google, I am taking Google as an example. Same concept. These days, wherever you go, right, to some websites, they give you a login screen, right, where you get to see login with Facebook, login with Google, login with how all that is happening because of open authentication mechanism. Alright, now what is that open authentication? Now we are looking at that itself, which is Open ID Connect authentication. Okay, of course there is a slight difference, everyone. Open ID Connect and OAuth 2. Of Open ID Connect, in this case we are leveraging this authentication mechanism. The underlying protocol is OAuth 2. Okay, what is actual OAuth 2? We will have a deep dive in one more session, but for now let's understand that OpenID Connect authentication is a wrapper on top of OAuth 2. So that means OpenID Connect authentication is to authenticate the user. In this case, where we are saying a particular web application, in this case Pega application, or it could be any non-Pega application also, some web application, let's say, right, any web application can leverage this OpenID Connect authentication, where we'll have OIDC provider which validates the identity of the users. Okay, of course the underlying protocol is OAuth 2, and ultimately once user enters the right credentials, which will be sent back to OIDC provider, finally a token would be granted to the user, and in this case that token is JSON web token, right? And what is JSON web token, how it would look like, all of that we will see, like how we have seen in SAML SSO, how the SAML SSO token looks like, right? We have all seen that, like how a SAML token would look like from the SAML tracer and all of that, right? In the same way, there are few tips and tricks which I will share with you, with which you can look at JSON web token as well at the end, right? And now going to the actual sequence diagram of OpenID Connect authentication. Let me go into presentation mode. Yeah, hope you can see this. Now, what are the parties which are involved here? Now, I'm calling this as a web server, which means in this case it's our Pega server itself. Okay, I have hosted, let's in our case we have hosted our Pega into one server. Our Pega is nothing but a web application which is deployed into this web server. Whenever user is trying to hit the web application, that means a user sitting at some place, he is from his laptop or from his system, from his browser, from a client, right? User tries to navigate to web application, which is here. Yeah, from browser, user is trying to navigate to our Pega application. Web server, again, don't take me wrong here, web server is the server where our web application is hosted. And in our case, what is our application? Our Pega application onboarding, and then on a server is the Tomcat server which I am using, which is currently in my local. Just to keep it very simple. That means from browser we will make a hit to our application. Then what happens? Already in our Pega application we will configure our OIDC authentication service in such a way that the redirects would happen and it would know what to do as part of this OIDC authentication. Before we get into what is configured at Pega, now what is this spec? How this OIDC authentication works? User navigates to the web application, right? After that, our web application, our Pega application would redirect the user to login, right? How it would do that? User would be presented with a login screen. Okay, so that means once we hit a from browser, when a user hits our Pega application, then user would be redirected to the login screen of OIDC provider. In this case, in this example, we will be using Google provider itself, Google OIDC provider. We are using Google console. So we are relying on Google. That means what login screen user will be presented with? User will be presented with Google login screen. So user, what user will do? User will enter the credentials, and then once user enters the credentials, then all that validations, everything, whatever credentials needs to be validated. Right now, where user has entered the credentials on the login screen, and that login screen is not our Pega login screen. That login screen is the OIDC provider login screen. In this case, Google, right? So Google will have a login screen, and in that Google login screen, user will enter the details, and then those details, those credentials will be passed to OIDC provider. We'll have a particular URL. You would notice, especially there will be two URLs which we capture from Pega also. I'll highlight that. Once we look at that configuration, again we'll revisit the sequence diagram. Okay, for now let's keep it at a high level itself. User is entering the credentials, and then the validation and all will happen at OIDC. Right? Yeah, user enters the credentials. Also, you would have seen in some of the applications it would ask you to consent to the permissions. Right? It will say, hey, I'm gonna access this, you want to confirm, then you click on some button on the screen. Right? That's how user will again be prompted with something like user enters the credentials, also all the consents to the permissions, whatever resource he wants to access, right? All the consents needs to be given, or if you feel this is heavy, you can ignore this, not so important. We can come back to this. And finally, once the validation is done, what OIDC provider will do? OIDC provider will return token to browser. We can see these tokens in a way from browser also, not everything, but in a way we can see all the redirects and what is that OIDC provider is returning to browser. All of that we can look at. Of course, if we go deep into this, anyways, like I said, if we want to cover all the OAuth 2 aspect also into this, it goes deep. That's why I want to cover that in a separate session. For now, we'll keep it very simple. User is entering the credentials, and finally once it is validated by OIDC provider, a token is returned back to the browser, right? And then from browser, the token is returned back to the redirect URI. Okay, so that means from browser, the whatever token is generated, that access token, let me not call it as access token for now. Let us call that as simple. In our case, it is nothing but our SSO token, which is nothing but an OIDC token. All right, so which returns the token to the redirect URI. Okay, what is a redirect URI? Again, we will know that from the configuration, but it's more like once the token is generated, we already specify in OIDC provider also, we have to provide our Pega URL saying that this is the redirect URI. Once the token is generated, that token would be handed over back to the redirect URI, which is our Pega. Okay, that means ultimately OIDC provider has to provide the token back to our Pega, and then Pega, what it does, it receives the token and it validates the token. How the validation of the token happens, that is interesting. Again, we will look at it. Again, it involves certificates. I think we have some of the articles in the blog also which talks about this, but not to drag more about it. For now, let's assume that Pega will validate the token. If you have any comments or any questions on this, feel free to comment. I can answer that as well. But like I said, how this token is getting validated is also an interesting thing. Once the token is validated, then it sets the session cookie. Right? Once the session cookie is set, that means the session is established in Pega, right? And then it returns a secure page to server, which means a protected resource, whatever the user is trying to access from Pega application, he would be able to access. He or she would be able to access. Fine. Now we understood, maybe we scratched the surface of the basics, right? OpenID Connect authentication. At least the good point is we understood what are all the parties involved over here. One is a web browser, and then another one is our Pega server, where a Pega server is hosted, right? And user is trying to access a protected resource which is there in our Pega server, right? And then how the authentication is taken care, who is taking care of all the identity part? OIDC provider, and this is the identity provider or OIDC provider. In our example which we are going to look at, like I said, who is the OIDC provider? That is are Google. Google is acting as a OIDC provider because it is very easy and flexible, and also for us very quick thing that we can bring it up to show any demos. And then web servers. What is a web server we are using today? We are using Tomcat, which is there in my local, where my Pega application name is onboarding. And then user is trying to reach to onboarding application. How he gets authenticated via this OIDC provider, via this OIDC authentication, is what we are going to look at the demo. Okay, hope it's not that complicated. Right, now let's get into the configuration. How can we do this configuration? Right, how can we implement this from Pega's head and also from the Google OIDC provider side? Yeah, now let's look at how to configure OIDC authentication in Pega, the implementation part. Now this is my local instance which I have configured to show this demo. Yeah, and currently I am logging in with my own developer ID, who is having admin access to one of the Pega applications. My Pega application name is onboarding. Here you see, so this is my onboarding application. Just switch to that. And now I would like to create a new authentication service, right? If we have to create a new authentication mechanism in Pega, we all know that we should navigate to records, sysadmin, authentication service, and then we create a new auth service. This time it's not SAML2, it is OpenID Connect, and then we will say OIDC auth. Okay, OIDC SSO auth. Let me call this way. OIDC SSO auth. Or I can call just, yeah, that is fine. Let me put it that way. You can name it, the name is up to you. And then whatever we are doing, this is OIDC SSO authentication, right? Let me update it here because we might have so many authentications in long run, right? Probably in one project. So just I'll update this history and usage as well, so that we know for what we have created this. An alias also I would like to maintain the same, but that is up to you. But importantly, whatever alias we are providing, that is the URL which is going to come. So I have copied the URL or SSO login URL, taking a backup onto a different screen. Yeah, I have saved that, and now we need all the information on this, all the remaining information that we have on authentication service. Everything is related to OpenID Connect provider configuration. Now where we will get all this authorization endpoint, token endpoint, issuer, signature, all of these details we are going to get from the OIDC provider. In our case, OIDC provider is Google. Alright, let me log in into Google console. Now I'm just entering this one. You'll have this link in the description or as part of this video or in the blog. You can check that. And now we are here. You see, we are here, and then you see APIs and services. We click. I am just clicking on dashboard. I would like to navigate to this one to configure the OAuth part. Right? Dashboard, right now already I'm inside a project called OIDC auth, but just to show you once again, I'm creating a new one, OIDC SSO auth. Yeah, OIDC SSO auth. No organization, since we are just using this for learning. And then you see OIDC SSO auth is created. So it's just created, and then I'll switch our thing to OIDC SSO auth. Yeah, now switching to this one. Right now we landed onto the latest one. To start with, here I think everything is quite easy. All we have to do is we have navigated here, we have created a new project. Now we are here onto the dashboard. Now clicking on credentials. Now once we click on the credentials, we have a place, right? We have a place where we can click on create credentials. Right, for this I click this OAuth client ID. Okay, first thing is it is asking for before I go to OAuth client ID, it's also saying you must first configure your consent screen. Let me configure this consent screen first. In that case, how will we create the consent screen? Here we have to select external, and then click on create, because I want to use only Gmail IDs, nothing new. So create, and then app name, this is all what we would be knowing already. Let's say application name in this case is my Pega onboarding application, and then user support is my email ID, my Gmail ID, and then nothing much. Developer contact information, again my own Gmail ID. Okay, and then we go to scopes, OAuth consent screen, and then we are at scopes. We are adding some of the scopes. We need OpenID, email, profile. We'll talk about it in a while, but OpenID is definitely a default scope that you should add it. Yeah, now we have added, and then saving and continuing. Then we have test users. We can skip this also, no need to add, but even if you want to add, you can add that. Probably I'll add couple of my Gmail IDs. Okay, and one more I would like to add. Okay, that's it. So we are almost there. That's it. We are set with the configuration. We have given the OAuth consent screen, right, and some more configuration. That's it. And now back to credentials. Now we should be able to create credentials. Keep going here, create credentials, OAuth client ID. Ours is a web application, right? So the web application, we have to provide the name, in this case web application, and then the name is in this case the onboarding application Pega, and then authorize redirect URI. You would see that from Pega itself. Let me open Pega to show you that. In Pega, you see there is a redirect URI which is mentioned over here. Copy this one, navigate back. This is very important because once it has the token, it would know that it has to send it redirected back to this particular URI. Yeah, that's all. I think now we have entered all the important information to create the OAuth client ID, and this is the most important point over here. Clicking on create. So it created, and then you see you have a client ID and client secret. I can download this JSON as well. I'm just downloading just so that I can pick it up from there. And okay, now we have our onboarding application and all the data is there, client ID, client secret, everything is present. Alright, now let me download this as also. I think there should be a URL. Okay, I clicked on that. There should be one way where I can download this as well, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, anyways, I got the client ID and client secret. Remaining things we'll see. There should be one place where metadata can be downloaded, but if we don't get it, we will see. Okay, but overall I think we have created the application. Yeah, now moving on. The domain URIs add below will be automatically, just checking this, and we have this. Yeah, that's all. Okay, now to the interesting part. Right, now we have to I think all the configuration is done. Only thing I am searching is, I figured out there is one link from where I got all the URLs, like what is a token URL, authorization endpoint URL, and all of that. Just I am checking for that screen where I have got it. Yeah, that's the only thing. I think it should be copy, or okay, maybe I didn't look at this JSON, right? Let me check what is there as part of this. I just opened that. Yeah, this is the one. Okay, this is the same one. I think I was assuming that it was a link, but it was more like this is the one. It's a JSON, right? This is a JSON, if you see, where I see my client ID and then client secret and then the authorization URI and the token URI. These are the details which we have to enter. Yeah, now let me format this. JSON format JSON. Yeah, now we have all of these details. Let me save this. You can also format it in this way so that you can enter what is the authorization endpoint over here, this one, right? I'll copy this, or else we'll do one thing. Let me put them side by side so that it will be easy for you. Now here this is Pega, and this side let me have this one. Alright, now you see in our authentication service on the left, it is asking for OpenID Connect provider configuration, and here authorization endpoint. What is our authorization endpoint? This one. We will pick that, and authorization endpoint, and token endpoint is this one, right? And user info endpoint, it's we don't want to give that. Anyways, we don't have that, let's not worry about it. And issuer, we don't know what is the issuer as of now. Let me put this as Google Cloud. Later anyways it will complain and we have to change this. And client certificate URL is provided, so we have to create a new one. So OIDC SSO auth, let me call this as some trust store. Yeah, and then I open this. Yeah, we need to create a new one over here. I'll just we will create in a while, but just coming back to this, let's enter all of these details, and we will, okay, maybe yeah, we will create it. That's fine, it won't take much time. And client identifier and client secret. Client identifier, I have it over here on the JSON, copying this. This is the client identifier, and client secret is this one. Okay, so we have all of the details, everything is fine. And finally we are expecting an attribute which will come from the token, which is email. Okay, even I'll show you that token part also, where you will see that extra key which is coming in as email, which will be mapped to our operator. That's it, we're almost there. We can click on save, but this signature trust store is not yet present, right? Let us create a new one. I clicked on this, so we are here. Then we are creating a trust store for this, right? Trust store for this, and we have the URL over here. Which URL is that? This one. For some reason it is providing a old URL. Ideally, because I have done this before also, there should be a better one, like reference to URL, and copy this URL, and as of the today's date that I am doing this video, it should be v3. Okay, when you are doing, you check the correct one and you can update the same one. Yeah, but we should rely on the JSON which is coming from Google. I think if I enter this, it will also give me an error. No doubt in that. Probably I'll show you that and then I'll change it. You might also face that issue. See, so that's why I know that this is not a valid URL, so I have changed it back. Yeah, and that's it, we are almost there. So trust store is done. Then we click on save to the authentication service. So all the authentication service setup is done in Pega. That means all the OIDC provider configuration we have done in Pega as well. Now we are all set, right? If you remember in scope in Pega, we have given only OpenID because OpenID is mentioned as a default one. There can be, like when we configured the OIDC provider, we have provided email and profile also as additional things, right? Let me add email and profile. Same scopes what I have added there, I would like to add over here also. Okay, that's all. We are all set. I think we are good. And then we mapped. We are saying once the with all these details, once all the exchanges are happened, then the token comes. From that token, email and profile, email claim will be picked, and it will be used to map to the operator ID. In this case, which one I am planning to use? It is my own Gmail ID. Probably I think I have already created that to test it. This is the one, how to pega@gmail.com. It's already there and it is pointed to users access group. Right now, let us see the demo. Ideally, what should happen now? All we have is this SSO URL, right? In our authentication service, we have this SSO OIDC SSO auth URL. Ideally, of course, for the first time getting it right might be tough, but yeah, if you get, you're lucky. But even then, if you don't get, if you're seeing an issue, we can go and debug that step by step, and eventually we would be there. Yeah, even if you're getting an issue, you you try to understand the concept and try to solve that issue. But let's see if anything comes up now. Let's debug that together now. Yeah, now I am going to open a different browser, which is Firefox. Okay, I'm opening Firefox browser. I have copied that URL. This is my URL. Let me mark also, so that I need not to, if it fails multiple times, it shouldn't waste our time. Now while doing this, let me clear all of the caches. Yeah, I have some caches, cleared everything, just to ensure clear recent history. Done. Yeah, all the caches are cleared, and now we are hitting our SSO URL. Once we make a hit, then where can we see that token, right? For that, what shall we do is, let's go to Pega, and then we will enable some loggings. The only way, at least I am aware of, or from my experience which I follow, is we can go to operations logs and logging level settings. You would see OIDC handlers. Okay, and in our case it uses, since we are using Google, and I know from the past experience, it is this one, Nimbus OIDC client handler. I'm selecting that, and all the configuration is set to all. Logging level is set to all. That means all the log statements we will go and look at. Right, that's all. We have enabled this also. I'm sure it will take us to some error, but wanted to, now I'm clicking on enter. Right, then it asks for email and phone, email, so I'm giving my Gmail ID, and then the right password, right password, and then it asks my consent. Okay, this Gmail ID, it's not there. Okay, fine. So good thing. I think now it is saying caught exception while parsing the ID token. Very good. We landed into one issue. But in reality also, you might end up seeing such issues. What we can do is, we can go to log files. Anyways, we have enabled all the logging required. Alright. Now I'm looking at the log file. Navigate to the last, and then see what is that error. Alright. Here you see, exception is thrown for OIDC flow and caught exception while parsing the ID token. What is the expected JWT issuer? This one, https accounts.google.com. What is the issuer I have provided, which is, on the authentication service, if you remember, I have provided a wrong one. Yeah, much before I think we understood what is the issue, but much before addressing that, I want to show you what is the token that got generated. If you see the logging which we have enabled, Nimbus OIDC client handler, if you see, these are all the statements that are printed. JWT is signed, like we discussed, the token is JSON web token, right? JWT, and trust or picked is the one which we have provided. Expected nonce, this you can ignore for now, we can look at it later. Expected issuer, why it is expecting this issuer? Because we have provided this on the Pega auth service, right? And what is the issuer that came from the token? That is this one. Ideally from Pega also I had to provide this valid one, then both will match, and then we won't be landed into this issue. Okay, now I am taking this entire JWT token. Whatever you see here, this is a JWT token. How I know that? If you see here, the ID token to be validated is this one. So this is the ID token which we are referring to. And now going to the important part, you can open in any browser jwt.io. Okay, then you will find a place where you can enter this, and then you can view this in a readable format. Okay, here I am pasting the ID that I have received. Then you see what is the token. This is the token. This is a JSON token. Alright, and now in the JSON token you see the key and value pairs, and in the key you see email is there because I have added email as in the scope. Alright, that is why you are seeing the email, and it has to pick this, and it has to establish a session which is returned as part of this email claim. Alright, so in our case it is howtopega@gmail.com is the operator ID in our case, and which is pointed to onboarding access group, and it should. Now we understood the problem also. All we have to do is we have to navigate back and pick the right JWT issuer of our certificate. Now minimize this, go back here, yeah, and issuer, earlier I gave a temporary one, now let me change it. Yeah, just wanted to show you, that's the reason I haven't given the right one. So this is the issuer, which is the right one, which from the cert side also during the verification it is expecting. So we have done it. Now let's go and take a look one more time. Yeah, now we'll clear all the caches and we redo the same thing again. History, clear recent history, done. That's it. There, hitting our URL. Okay, actually I made a hit to that URL, it was too fast I think. Let me pick the URL and hit it. Okay, this is a URL which I have which I have taken from Pega, right? Let me hit it from here itself. Yeah, you see the URL. This is our SSO URL, right? Pega SSO URL OIDC. I make a hit to that. It took me to Google OIDC provider. All right. Now I am giving my Gmail ID and then password. Okay, and then you see user, it got validated, and also user got routed to the right application. Agree? And now I think the important part is covered, but now I'll tell you some miscellaneous things which you might already be knowing. We have seen that in SAML also, SAML SSO also. You have seen operator identification and email ID. Alright, what if you don't capture email here, then you cannot provide email over here, right? All of that are self-explanatory. When you are doing, just remove them and see what errors you are landing into, and then correct them so that you get a fair idea. These are the real-time things usually what happens from where I have seen. Or else the claim, whatever you are passing, not just the email, it could be any other claim which you are trying to collect here, and it is not available as part of the ID token. And how to view the ID token also you have seen, how to enable those loggers, right, from Pega. And finally, advanced configurations, you leave them as it is. And now in this example, just to keep it simple, I have already created an operator ID which I have used, right? The operator ID which I have created and used is this one, howtopega@gmail.com. If you want it to be created on the fly, then what you need to do is, enable operator provisioning, and then you can provide a model operator. Based on that, it would create. All this remains the same, so this is pretty basic, so not going there, but in real time every customer would ask for this. Just you practice it once you reach till here, but the point is, if you reach till here, then you understand. I'm assuming that you have understood all the concept, and you will be able to do all this configuration on your own, and you will be pretty confident, right? That's pretty much it. One last thing to cover is, in the operator ID, just ensure that this use external authentication is selected, or if you're using model operator also, just ensure that it is selected, right? Or else you might land into different issues. But overall, you have seen that we are able to log into application. We made a hit to our SSO URL, right? And then all the validation happened. Then it prompted us the Google login screen. Right, then we entered the credentials, and then credentials are validated, and then finally we got redirected to the actual portal as an end user. Right here I see the onboarding application which I'm intended to see. Yeah, that sums up the demo. Yeah, feel free to comment. You can try this on your own and then pass on the comments. Feel free to comment on the blog or YouTube video or anywhere, but yeah, we'll be happy to comment on that. Yeah. Thank you. Hope you have enjoyed. Bye.